Hi everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions, and this week's first question comes from Radical Bacon, who wants to know, what do you think of Rocky Horror Picture Show? I have to tell you, I'm not a big fan. I don't think it's that great of a movie. I think the best I can say about it is that it's kind of amusing in some parts, it's funny in certain places, but I'm not like a huge fan of it, and I'm certainly not part of the group that has made it like a big, the ultimate cult classic. And, it's just not my thing. And the going to the theater and seeing it and dressing up and doing the call and response thing, I mean, I can see how that would be fun, but it's not really my deal. This next one is from Band for Fun. What makes Angel, the series, better than Buffy the Vampire Slayer? You once called it superior, and as a Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan who hasn't watched Angel, I would like to get into it. How would you sell it to me? I would sell it to you by saying that it's like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, only just maybe that much more serious than Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The characters in Angel are all adults from the very beginning of the series, so it doesn't have the coming of age aspect that Buffy has, where they're in high school for the early part of the series. And it's not that that's a detriment to Buffy, it's just that Angel feels like a more mature show. And Angel was great because I feel like that's really where Joss Whedon and his other writers as well, not just Whedon, but there were some really incredibly talented writers who worked on Angel. Guys like Ben Edlund was on it, who was also the creator of The Tick. You might know him, and they really perfected that mixture, that balance I mentioned in another video where I talked about Joss Whedon, that mixture of drama and just fucking fall flat on your face funny comedy. Angel is one of the best shows ever for that, and it did that, I think, better than Buffy did. Dr. Meh asks, any thoughts on Comet Ison coming about this time next year? No, this isn't Nibiru shit, though I expect those types will fill their pants. On one hand, I'm excited about seeing it, but on the other hand, I really worry about people going bananas like it's the end times. Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm looking forward to seeing it too, because it's this rare astronomical event that we get to see, and I'm looking forward to it just for that, because it's going to be cool. It's going to be something that doesn't happen very often. We're going to be visited. We're having company next year. A new comet. We're having company next year. That's how I feel about it. Then yeah, the Doomsday people, after the 2012 thing comes and goes and is shown to be just horseshit, they'll need to glom onto something else, and some of them I'm sure will choose the Comet, and that's fine. Let them do whatever they want. It gives me people to make fun of. That's how I look at it. It gives me people to make fun of, and I appreciate it for that reason. Cyborg Atheist. Speaking of how the Next Generation films sucked, what do you think was their main problem? How would you have done it differently? Speaking of the Star Trek, the Next Generation films, the last 4 films in the Star Trek franchise before J.J. Abrams came in and took over and rebooted it. I don't think all 4 of the Next Generation films sucked. I think the first one and the last one sucked. I think the middle 2 are good, especially First Contact is really, really good. And I have a soft spot for Insurrection. A lot of people don't like Star Trek Insurrection. But I think it's a lot of fun, and I always enjoy watching it. But the first one and the last one, the bookends of the Next Generation films, Generations and Nemesis, those are both terrible. And how would I do it differently? Well, with Generations, if I couldn't have gotten both crews, the crews of the Enterprise from both shows aboard for the movie, then I just wouldn't have bothered doing a crossover at all. I would have just done a Next Generation movie and gone off in that direction from the start. If I couldn't have gotten Spock, if I couldn't have gotten Dr. McCoy, if I couldn't have gotten Uhura, if I couldn't have gotten the whole old crew and done a full crossover where the 2 crews meet, the 2 ships meet, and done it really big, a really big epic story where the crews of both Enterprises have to come together to do something, if I couldn't have done that, then I just wouldn't have bothered. I wouldn't have bothered making a movie that was basically a shitty Next Generation movie with Captain Kirk as a guest star. I just wouldn't have bothered with that. And for the last one, for Nemesis, how would I have done that differently? I would have done a lot of shit differently with that. One thing that comes to mind, I would have given Commander Riker something more important to do than fight Ron Perlman for like the entire 3rd fucking act. I would have thought that maybe. Main guy Simon, what is your opinion about the French New Wave? I am not a very well-studied student of the New Wave. I'll be honest with you; it's not one of the schools that I am super familiar with. But one of my very favorite filmmakers does come from the New Wave, and it's Francois Truffaut, one of the founding fathers of the French New Wave cinema. I love Truffaut. I love the 400 Blows. I love Jules and Jim. I have the DVD set from Criterion Collection of the Antoine Doinel series, which started with the 400 Blows, and continued. He actually, for those of you who don't know, Truffaut did something somewhat unique in cinema. He actually made a series of films over a period of about 20 years, returning to the same character, and it was always played by the same actor. So you basically got to see the boy from 400 Blows grow up and become an adult throughout about 4 or 5 different films spaced out through about 20 years. And it was really interesting. Not all of them are great films, but they're all good films, and it's just a wonderful experiment to witness, to see the same character played by the same actor, directed by the same director in a series of films as he grows into an adult from a boy. And the first of those, the 400 Blows, I think that was Truffaut's first film, or at least his first significant film, and that's a great movie. And of course Jules and Jim, also Jules and Jim, one of the great movies ever. Beautiful, heartbreaking movie. And Truffaut once said, "I always start my films as comedies, and then I reach a point where I realize only tragedy can save them." And Jules and Jim is such a perfect example of that. Quetzalcoatl 2012, why do you always wear a hat? Because I look much better with a hat than I do without a hat. And because it's much easier than ever having to fuck with my hair. Avery Dawes asks, why can you pee without pooping but can't poo without peeing? Well, Avery, you can poo without peeing. There are a few tricks you need to learn in order to do this. The first, most basic one is if you want to poo without peeing, then just pee first. If you're a male, you can do this by standing up, and you just stand up and you pee first, and you get that out of the way, and then you can sit down and take a shit, and you won't pee at the same time. And if you're a lady, you can do this as well, but of course you'll have to probably sit down. I'm not sure. I guess you could stand up and pee if you were a lady, but I've never seen it done. And it could be done. I think it's just that the concern is over the mess is the problem. Maybe you could do it in the bathtub or in the shower, but yeah, you pee first, so the pee's gone, your bladder is empty, and then when you sit down to take a shit, there's nothing else to come out, so you won't pee at the same time. Or also, there's another option. If you don't feel like doing that, again, this works best if you're a male. If you have a penis, you sit down, and while you're taking your shit, you just reach down and you just pinch it shut. You just pinch the head of your penis shut like that. See, you just pinch it shut so that nothing can come out. And then when your shit's done, then you release it, and if there's anything in there to pee out, you just pee it like that. And be warned that if you really have to pee, doing that can be really painful. So keep that in mind. Be aware of that going in. Bassbait asks, what do you think is the best film of all time? And by best, I mean things like the influence it had on filmmaking and even real-life events, the innovations of the film in storytelling, technology, and other filmmaking aspects. And then in the part of the question that I cut out, Bassbait, you said that you wouldn't argue for Citizen Kane, but you would argue for 2001: A Space Odyssey. I think, judging by the criteria that you have laid out here, I think 2001: A Space Odyssey is a really good pick for best film of all time, considering all of those criteria that you just mentioned, all of those factors. Another really good suggestion would be Birth of a Nation, even though the content of Birth of a Nation is repulsive to most of us today because of how virulently and openly racist it is. If you've never seen Birth of a Nation, it's a great silent film from 1914 by D.W. Griffith, one of the great filmmakers ever. Incredibly innovative, incredibly influential, probably the most technically influential film ever made. You watch Birth of a Nation and you see the language of modern cinema being written before your eyes, is basically what you're seeing. techniques like cross-cutting, various ways of using montage, using various shots within the same scene, starting with a wide shot, cutting into a close-up, things like that, cross-cutting between characters having a dialogue. Those things didn't really exist as storytelling techniques until Griffith used them in Birth of a Nation. It is an incredibly important film. And by these criteria, it must be considered as one of the most important, or as one of the greatest films, best films ever made. The only problem with it is that it is, in terms of its content, incredibly offensive to us today. And was incredibly offensive to a lot of people back then, too. It's not just a matter of our tastes have changed over the years. There were a lot of people who were horrified by it back then when it opened. Because it is an incredibly racist film. It glorifies the Confederacy, it glorifies the Ku Klux Klan, it demonizes African Americans in a really, really brutal, crude way. It's not a very enjoyable film to watch for its content at all. But in terms of its technical skill, in terms of its importance to cinema as an art form, it's maybe the most important film ever made. And for that reason, it deserves to be on any list of best films judged by the criteria that Bass Bait mentions here. But overall, I think I would not argue with 2001 Bass Bait. I would not argue with 2001. I think that's a really good pick if you're going to have one movie as the best film of all time. Judging by your standards here, 2001 is a pretty good pick. Zents29, you mentioned morality and subjectivity in this video, meaning the last video. Where do you stand on the subjective, objective, moral arguments? I think morality is entirely subjective. I know that there are other philosophers, there are atheist philosophers. Shelley Kagan is the one that always jumps to mind because I know him best because of the debate he had with William Lane Craig that you can find on YouTube. He believes that morality could be objective. Even though he is an atheist, he believes that objective moral standards could be pre-existing, that could exist outside of us and our culture and our standards. I don't really think that way. I don't see how that's possible. I don't see how you can view morality as something like a tree or a rock or a law of nature even that exists, that would be there whether we were there or not. The only possible use of a moral law or a moral standard is to judge the behavior of moral beings like us. And if moral beings did not exist, I don't see how or why those standards would exist. I mean, try to imagine a universe where there are no moral beings whatsoever. There are no sentient, sapient beings at all. How would morality exist? What would morality be there for? How would it even be there? To me, it's entirely subjective. Morality is something that we create ourselves from not just our own wants and needs and empathies and etc. as individuals, but when we make those judgments on the whole as communities and as cultures and as species in some cases. That's what I think morality comes from. I think it's entirely subjective. I think it is a human invention. And I think it's one of our best, most useful human inventions. And I think the fact that it is a human invention is what makes it valuable. I'd never have understood the argument that it's better to believe that morality was handed down to us from someone, from a god, or that it's something that pre-exists, that humans just found and recognized and began to make use of. I've never understood why we should prefer that to the model of subjective morality, because doesn't it say something about us that we decided for ourselves not to kill each other, or at least that killing each other should be considered wrong and taboo? Doesn't it say something for us that we decided on our own that we ought to respect each other's rights, we ought not to steal from one another, we ought to discourage lying and violence and things like that? Doesn't it say something about us that we decided that for ourselves, that we got there on our own? We didn't need to be told by a higher power or by a pre-existing natural law. We didn't need that. We did that ourselves. And the fact that we did it ourselves is what gives it its importance and gives it its meaning and gives it its value. Because we didn't just take it off a shelf. We aren't just following orders. We aren't just acting as we are compelled to by some natural standard. We're doing it ourselves because we think it's important. I've never understood why the opposite is seen to be so attractive to people. Lars Brooders asks, what is your favorite sitcom? Of all time, my favorite sitcom is All in the Family. Of more recent sitcoms, probably the original BBC version of The Office. I think that's like a top 3 show for me. I love the original Office. And when I was growing up, my favorite sitcom was Perfect Strangers. I loved Perfect Strangers. I loved Larry and Balky. They had such wonderful comic timing. And that was the last question. How about that? Let's do a shout out, shall we? This week's shout out goes to Old Comic 1, a.k.a. Honest John. Honest John is one of my very favorite YouTubers. He makes usually pretty short videos, which I know a lot of people like. He's not nearly as long-winded as I am. And he is so funny and has some really sharp political and cultural commentary to offer. And again, like Dazzle Tag last week, criminally undersubscribed. Old Comic 1, Honest John. Very much worthy of your attention, your subscription, your viewership. The man is terrific. That is it for this week. I will be back next week to answer more of your questions. But of course, I cannot answer your questions. First, you have to ask before I can answer. Do you see how this works? All right? I can't do a show next week. I can't do one of these next week if you don't ask me questions to answer. So ask. I don't care what about, okay? Ask me anything. Ask me anything. Any one of these subjects that we just talked about here, whatever. Ask me anything you want about anything. Movies, personal shit, politics, religion. I don't care. Ask me anything. Ask me anything, and I will answer as many as I can until I feel like it's just going on way too long. Thanks for watching. Thanks all of you for asking questions in all seriousness. It's great that you ask and participate in this, and it's a lot of fun for me. I hope it's fun for you too. And I will see you back here to answer more of your questions next week. See you next week.